All right, and we are live Friday at noon. This is another book discussion every week at noon on Fridays, unless I have something else going on. We discuss another leadership book, and today we are discussing the brand new book just released, I think last week, The Dichotomy of Leadership. It is the follow-up to one of my favorite leadership books of the last few years, The Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. So this kind of carries on from where he left off in Extreme Ownership, and it's an absolutely fantastic book. I do recommend you pick it up, although I do recommend picking up Extreme Ownership first. So if you haven't read Extreme Ownership, it's a great book, one of my favorites, so definitely pick it up. I did a book discussion on that a couple of months ago, so you can go ahead and tune into that. Abu, so good to see you here. Kelly, good to see you here as well. I did want to let everybody know, next Friday I will be discussing Decisive by Chip Heath, Chip and Dan Heath. And then the week after that, there's a brand new book coming out by Brené Brown, Dare to Lead. She is a fantastic author and researcher, and I'm looking forward to diving into that book. It comes out next week. I'll read it and we'll discuss it a couple of weeks from now. So thrilled to have you on board for these. If you did come to this session late, no worries. You can pick it up at any time. This is just me talking about the highlights and kind of summarizing and applying some of the principles in this book. You can always check these out either in Facebook, you can check out the videos, or over on YouTube is probably the easiest way to do it. I have a whole book discussion section that we're filling out as we go through each of these weeks. So diving right into it, The Dichotomy of Leadership by Jocko Willink. There's a couple of just really good highlights as he's kind of going through the introduction to this book, and I wanted to call them out because they are just solid little bits of leadership wisdom for you. The first one in the introduction is just calling out that the goal of all leaders should be to work themselves out of a job. I'm going to say that again because it's such a key. The goal of any leader is to work themselves out of a job, developing your team enough to where they can take over for you and that you can move on to different things. But leadership isn't about creating more followers, as the old saying goes. Leadership is about creating more leaders. And there's some fantastic takeaways in this book that talk about, and I guess I'll get into the kind of the dichotomy of leadership. What that means is two sides of the same coin, shall we say, and that's the real difficulty of leadership. We'll get into, caring about your team, but also caring about the mission and how you can go too far on one side or another. Riju, so good to see you here. So he goes through 12 different areas where there are dichotomies of leadership. The first one is caring too much about employees versus caring too much about the mission and the goals and not being personal with people. And it's just fantastic for those that have jumped on. Fantastic. If you've read it, by all means, jump into the comment section. Let me know what your thoughts were on the book, or if you have any questions. And as I go through this, by all means, if you have some questions, wondering how it might apply to regular day in, day out leadership, I'll try to hit those points. But if there's any questions you have, drop in. This is meant to be a live sort of discussion here. I realize this book just came out a week and a half ago, but let's go ahead and make that a discussion as much as possible. Talking about that ultimate what he calls the ultimate dichotomy, caring about the person versus caring about the leader. And again, I just kind of go through this and just pull out some of the highlights, some of the things that I underlined in the book that have application to day in, day out leadership and can help you through that. First concept is, if leaders develop overly close relationships with their people, they may not be willing to make those people do what is necessary to complete a project or task. And this comes up in my live Q&As a lot. Can I be friends with my employees? And it came up just recently. You spend more than 40 hours a week with them. You spend more time than you do with your family. Can you have close friendships? And my answer is always yes, absolutely. I think it's good to be friends on friendly terms with each of your employees. You know what? Maybe you do join them for drinks for a birthday party or something like that. Within reason, of course, and within the tolerances of your organization. But it's important to care about your team. Great leaders always care about their team. They don't just care about results. They do, but it's not just about that. It's also about the team on a personal level. Again, getting back to that first point, you want to be developing leaders within your team. And to do that, you have to invest in them. And to make investing easy, you have to care about them. All right, so it's important that you do develop close relationships with each of your employees and with each of your team members. That way you understand what they care about. what their goals are, what they're interested in, where they want to grow. And that gives you tons of information with which you can make better decisions in leading them. Edna, so good to see you here from Africa. And Maria, good to have you on board as well. Second point, and this talks about the dichotomy. So the first one, it's important to develop close relationships, but be careful that you are still able to lead them, that you're still able to discipline them if need be. Give them the hard criticism. On the other hand, if a leader is too detached from the team, he or she may overwork, overexpose, or otherwise harm its members while achieving no significant value from that sacrifice. And I hate to say it, but we've all had those bosses that really didn't care about the employees. They cared about the results, getting the sales results, getting the improvements in the orders shipped and the productivity, that sort of thing, and didn't care on a personal level. And what that does is that actually hurts your ability to get those results. It's kind of one of those funny things, and it highlights the dichotomy that in caring so much about the results, you actually hurt your ability to get those results. You need to bring the balance into that of caring about the employee. Then they will work harder for you, and you will also understand what buttons to press, what levers to pull with them to get the best performance out of them. Carrying on with that concept, if you don't make the hard decisions, you will be hurting the people you care about, not helping them. And this kind of goes, I want to say, almost both ways with it. So if you care about the team so much that you don't want to have those hard discussions, and I see this all the time, a lot of leaders, especially the ones that want to improve themselves, that might be listening to the Q&As, might be watching my videos. Those are the leaders that tend to care a lot about their team. And it can go too far, where you don't want to have the hard conversation of holding them accountable for things. And it's important, if you don't make the hard decisions, in the end you end up hurting the people you care about, not helping them. If you don't give the people that you care about on your team the difficult criticism with which they need to be able to get better, you're not helping them. You may be making them feel good in the short term, but even on the long-term basis, you're not helping them grow and develop, and that's what gets deep-seated satisfaction. That in today's world, even a better leader has to consider his immediate superiors and other superiors inside the organization as his first customer. Can you give me your opinion on this? I'll say no. I'll say no on this one, Riju. I'd say your first customer is your employee. First and foremost, that's what gets your results. All right? That's what drives the results that is going to make your superiors happy. We get into this a little bit later. There's talking about not just leading, but following. That's another dichotomy that's in there. And I'll show you, tune in just a little bit later here. I want to say it's probably about 30 minutes away before we get to it, because there are a lot of great takeaways in this book. But talking about the difference between following and leading and being a good follower. But I would say your primary customer is going to be your employees. Secondary customer is probably the customer. And then your third customer is probably your superior. And you can go back and forth on that, but I think it's important to focus on the employee first, because that's what drives your results. You as an individual can't drive the sort of results that you need from a team of 10. They can always outproduce you, so it's important to invest there, Riju. Great comment. I love that comment, and you're not far off on here. And this book does actually discuss some of those things in this. And I will say, in some of these dichotomies, in some of them there are a ton of takeaways. And a ton of things. I underlined a ton in some of these chapters. And then in others, I only underlined a few highlights because I want to say it was almost obvious. Some of these dichotomies are a little bit more obvious to people than others. And certainly are the ones that I see people struggle with on more of a regular basis. Moving into, so the first dichotomy is drawing that from caring about the employee to caring about the mission, and finding that balance where you are driving the employee towards the mission. That's how you get those really good results there. Next dichotomy that he gets into is own it all, but empower others. So this gets into where I want to say he received some blowback after extreme ownership. It's important that you as the leader own everything. Every mistake that is made within your organization ultimately falls on you. And my test to this is always, was there something, so an employee screwed something up, all right? They should absolutely take ownership of the screw up. But was there something that you could have done to make sure that that didn't happen? Was there additional training? Was there a checklist? Was there something that some indicator that you could have highlighted to employees so they didn't have that mistake? That's that extreme ownership part. But the important thing is that you don't own everything. You make sure that you are empowering your team empowering your team so that they take ownership as well. It isn't just on you. That's good principle to have, taking it on yourself, taking that ownership so that you can do something about it. But it's important that you balance that with your team as well. Just one I highlighted here that hits this, and I think this is something that resonates with a lot of us who take ownership and are strong leaders with a strong background, and we know what we're supposed to do. We know what the team is supposed to do, and what happens is when you're really confident in leadership and really capable in leadership, it is easy for you to own everything and just start directing your team. It's a form of micromanagement, quite frankly, not what we classically think of, but if you are directing your team with everything, they aren't getting the chance to think for themselves. And so the comment that really kind of sparked that for me in the book is the reason they hadn't stepped up prior, he's talking about a particular situation, the reason they hadn't stepped up prior to this was that I hadn't allowed it. It's important that you allow your team to step up into leadership roles, to take some control over something that perhaps you're absolutely fantastic with, to take some control. And it's important that you balance that with the risk. There is always a risk that is associated with that. Developing team members, empowering team members comes with a risk that there's going to be a certain level of failure. And it may just be a failure to meet the high expectations that you could have done. Yes, you might be able to do every single one of your employees' jobs really well. But if they are going to get to your level, shall we say, you have to let them go through all of those failures, all of those perhaps sub-perfect performances so that they learn from that. Mahmoud, so good to see you and glad you joined us today. And that's one of those principles in, owning it all, but empowering others. Talking about I'm going through my miscellaneous highlights on here. I wanted to highlight, he throws out a few indicators of whether you're dipping into micromanagement or whether you are detaching from the team too much. Here are the common symptoms that result from micromanagement. So these are the things that you might see. So for all of you listening, see if any of these things kind of jump out at you as far as your team is concerned, and that might be an indicator that you are owning too much. I won't even say micromanaging. You're owning too much and you're not giving them room to grow and be empowered. So first indicator of micromanagement, the team shows a lack of initiatives. Members will not take action unless directed. That gets back to that comment before that I hadn't allowed them to step up into certain situations. Number two, the team does not seek solutions to problems. Instead, its members sit and wait to be told about the solution. All right, is your team innovating? Three, even in an emergency, a team that is being micromanaged will not mobilize and take action. Again, they are waiting, even in an emergency, and that can be your big indicator. If you have a crisis that occurs, especially let's say you're away from the office at a meeting with a customer, for instance, and nobody took action on that crisis while you were away, that's an indicator of micromanagement. Those are those times when people have an excuse to step up. You weren't there, it was a crisis, I had to do something. If people don't have that feeling that they have to do something, you're not empowering them enough. 4, bold and aggressive action becomes rare. 5, creativity grinds to a halt. They're waiting for you. You're not getting any new ideas from your team. The team tends to stay inside their own silo, not stepping out to coordinate efforts with other departments or divisions for fear of overstepping their bounds. They're being very mindful not to step on your toes. You are the one that controls the outside, interfaces and interactions, which doesn't need to be the case. 7, an overall sense of passivity and failure to react. The big thing that so many of these are getting to is your team isn't being proactive with anything. They aren't taking ownership. They aren't taking the steps needed to fix issues. They are waiting for you. That feels really good to us. And again, this is where I get back to, if you're a really capable and really strong and really confident leader, that's great. But what can happen with that strength of yours is the weakness is that you're not developing and empowering your team enough. So those are the indicators. If that popped out to you, you might need to be empowering your team more. Now, the flip side of that coin, the dichotomy, is that here are the common symptoms that indicate when a leader is too hands-off with the team. Micromanagement is a big issue, but macro management, where you have no understanding of what's going on in the organization, that's absolutely a problem, and we've had those leaders as well, many of us. Number one, a lack of vision in what the team is trying to do and how to do it. So you don't know what the team is trying to do. You don't know how they're doing their individual things. You're hazy on that. When you're not clear on that, it's hard for you to make decisions. It's hard for you to manage the team. So if you don't have an understanding of what they're trying to do and how they're doing it, that can be an indicator of a problem. Lack of coordination between individuals on the team and efforts that often compete or interfere with each other. So what happens is in a leadership vacuum, people don't know what to do. They don't know who the leader is. Some are trying to coordinate, some aren't, but you get just a mess. And so when you see a lot of disorganization in departments or organizations, that can be an indicator that the leader is too detached, that they actually need to step in and own a little bit more and be a little bit clearer on what the directives are. Initiative oversteps the bounds of authority, and both individuals and teams carry out actions that are beyond what they have the authorization to do. Now, I often tell people to do this. When you have a boss that won't do anything, then if you have a boss that doesn't do anything, I say, you know what, go ahead and step in and do it. If they're too hands-off, this can be an indicator. If they see that you're doing that, that can be an indicator that they aren't stepping into the role, or you aren't stepping in the role if other people are kind of overstepping. Number 4, failure to coordinate. While a micromanaged team might not coordinate with other teams because it doesn't want to overstep its bounds, a team without good guidance may also fail to coordinate, not out of fear, but out of ignorance. In its efforts to solve problems and accomplish the mission, the team forgets that other teams might be also maneuvering and end up interfering with their efforts. So without you and your perspective seeing what your peers in other departments are doing or what other silos are doing, the team is ignoring that aspect of things, and so they're not coordinating with other individuals. 5, an indication that you might have stepped too far out of your operation. You're empowering your team too much. Really, quite frankly, you might be detached, but the team is focused on the wrong priority mission or pursuit of solutions that are not in keeping with the strategic direction of the team or the commander's intent. They don't have a clear direction on what they're doing. They're going about their work. They're busy, but they're not necessarily being effective. There are too many people trying to lead. Since everyone is trying to lead, there won't be enough people to execute. That's another great one that comes in. Instead of progress, the leader will see discussion instead of action. The leader will see prolonged debate instead of unified movement. The leader will see fractured elements pursuing individual efforts. So when you're not there to lead and guide the discussion, what can often happen is that individuals on the team try to lead. But without the authority, they can't get anything going. They can't get any sort of consensus going because, again, they don't have anybody leading them. Mahmoud, can you please tell me about that, how to deal with my manager who disappoints? You know, Mahmoud, I'll actually get to that in another Mentor Minutes episode. I'm going to take that away. In my next Mentor Minutes that you see, live Q&A that I do, I'm going to lead off with that one, okay, Mahmoud? I don't want to diverge from this particular discussion here. When these behaviors, any of them, micromanagement or too much detachment, when these behaviors are observed by a leader, first and foremost, this is how you fix both of those things. So if you want to know how you're going the middle path between ownership and empowering of your team, look to do this. First and foremost, clear guidance must be given. The mission, the goal, and the end state must be explained in simple, clear, and concise manner. All right? Get clear on what the goals are. Get clear on what the priorities are. And that's the first step in really aligning everybody towards the particular goals. It helps with empowerment. And if you're too detached from the operation, it helps guide everybody's effort. So even if you're not there, they're at least moving in the right direction with so many things. Kind of going along. So that's the second dichotomy between ownership and empowerment. The third dichotomy that he talks about in the book is being resolute but not overbearing. All right, so being confident in what you're doing, but not ramming it down people's throats. Witnessing how Jocko held the line and enforced the standards to ensure we knew how to program radios, yet allowed some slack when it came to wearing patches, set a powerful example on how to balance this dichotomy. So, and this book is filled with tons of stories. That's what makes Extreme Ownership, the first book, so good. And then this book stacks on even more real-world stories, both from the war in Iraq and then also through their consulting in the business world as well. So there's a ton of good stories to find application of these principles and help it to resonate with you. And one of the reasons this book is so powerful with that. And so they go through a story in the battle in Iraq where everybody needed to program their radios. Very important for communication purposes. However, there was also a directive that there weren't any sort of silly patches that they would put on their uniforms. However, people took a little bit of leeway with that. Jocko was aware of it. However, he did not come down on anybody necessarily because of it. He picked his battles, all right? Resolute on the important things, but not overbearing on those things that aren't important. And they'll explain why here in just a second, why that's so important that you draw that line between what you're going to be firm on and what you were going to have a little bit of leeway on. The concept that they talk about in drilling that home is leadership capital. You only have so much leadership capital to use. It's a recognition that there is a finite amount of power that any leader possesses. How you use that power, again, you only have so much over the course of a day, a week, a year. How you use that power goes a long way in how effective that you're going to be and how your team is going to perceive you. The most important explanation a leader can give to the team is why. So when we talk about being resolute, that doesn't mean that you give orders and expect it to just be followed blindly. And for those of you that read a book where, written by a military person, that's not the way that the military works. We all have that perception. As a civilian, I have that perception from the outside, but that's absolutely not the case. You give directive, but you give why. That gives a whole bunch of things. It provides accountability. It shows why something is actually important, the reason for it needing to take place. It helps people prioritize on the fly, getting back to the other dichotomy about empowering people. If they understand the reasons and the importance behind something, they'll be more likely to follow it and then take it the next step that it needs to go. Woo. Spinning around to my next highlights here. So, talking about being resolute but not overbearing. They don't force things down the throats of their subordinates. And they also don't sweat the small stuff. That way, when they explain the importance of something that really matters, it doesn't get lost on the troops. If you're trying to ram stuff down everybody's throat, every little thing, then all of a sudden nothing becomes important. All right? If everything has to get done that's on your to-do list, then it doesn't, and you can actually get it done, then it doesn't matter which one gets done first because they'll all get done. The reality, though, is that not everything on your to-do list can get done. So you need to prioritize. You need to explain to yourself why something matters so you get done the most important things. In the case of leadership, explaining why things are important, explaining why they matter, helps you decide what you need to stand firm on, but also lets the team take a little bit of initiative with it. The concept is, the question when we talk about a business example in here, John, it's so good to see you here. The person that they were consulting with, the question was, well, won't that make me look weak if I don't, hold firm on something, or if I'm wishy-washy on certain small things? The comment is it will actually make you look stronger. It shows that you understand what is strategically important, where you're using that leadership capital that you have. You have that finite amount of power that you can use. So if you can decide, hey, all of this stuff is important for such and such a reason, but some of it is much smaller. If you can make those determinations, it actually builds more leadership capital and more trust because people understand that. All right, that will increase your leadership capital with the department leaders who you are relying on to implement the new procedure. Oh, okay. The idea behind that is that you do let the little things slide to a certain extent, and we will get to a comment or some principles in here on how you're letting it slide and that you're still keeping tabs on it, because there is a reason behind it. And what you may find is that if people are not following along with your directives, you have not been clear enough on the reason why that directive needs to be followed. That's the number one thing in so many of these cases, is having that understanding. There was a reason that you came up with the directive, the task, the priority that you did. You need to get good at explaining it. That's one of the most important things in leadership, is explaining why something needs to be done a certain way. Now, for those of you that aren't naturally good at that, that's fine. You get lots of practice in leadership explaining why something is important, why it needs to be done a certain way. And so if you're not particularly great at it now, no problem. You get lots of practice and you get better and better. And the better you get at it in leadership, the better the results are going to be for you down the road. Fourth dichotomy is when to mentor and when to fire. And this is one I have a whole lot of takeaways on. So the principle is, you as a leader should be lifting up, investing in your team, building on their strengths, covering for their weaknesses, training them, developing them, helping them grow in the organization. That's an important aspect of leadership. However, it is balanced with the situation of when people cannot meet those expectations. And so you do have to fire them. One of the most important things that I took away, I underlined this one a couple of times, and that is, firing people is one of the most difficult things a leader must do. So if you've been in leadership for a few years and you have not fired anybody on your team, I would say it's more than likely that you need to step up a little bit and hold more people accountable. It's important to overall team dynamics. We'll explain that a little bit more here. But firing people is something that you must do as a leader. It's not something you look forward to. It's not something that you want to do, but it is something that just naturally happens, because naturally some people are going to be in roles that are not suited to them. And no matter how much you invest in time and effort in building them up and in training them for the good of the team and the good of the organization and the good of that employee, you need to let them go so that they can find a place where they are going to be successful. While a leader must do everything possible to help develop and improve the performance of individuals on the team, a leader must also understand when someone does not have what it takes to get the job done. When all avenues to help an individual get better are exhausted without success, then it is the leader's responsibility to fire that individual so he or she does not negatively impact the team. One of the best ways to improve the overall performance of your team is to get rid of toxic individuals, to get rid of people who aren't performing and can't perform no matter how much time you've invested in them. That makes, not only does just eliminating that person raise the average, let's say, but what it does is it lets your superstars know that you are holding everybody accountable, that there are repercussions. It lets your middle of the road people know that this is a high performing team. It helps them take pride in their work and the team that they are on. It is a high performance team, and if people aren't up to snuff with it, they aren't going to be able to be on the team much longer. Most underperformers, that being said, and I hit the hard part here first, and so does he. That being said, most underperformers don't need to be fired. Too many times we'll go with the, you know what, I don't want to spend the time, this person isn't working out, I'm going to let him go. Most other underperformers don't need to be fired. They need to be led. I love that concept that most underperformers, the vast majority, 75, 80, 90% of underperformers don't need to be fired. They need to be led better. They need to be invested in. You need to find ways to show why, motivate them and hold them accountable in different ways. This doesn't mean that they are worthless. It just means that the leader needs to utilize them. And this is talking about those individuals who, let's say you've even invested more time in training and empowerment. You've had the discussion with them. You've tried everything that you can. This doesn't mean that they are worthless. It just means that the leader needs to utilize them in a position where their strengths are fully capitalized. The reason that I took the underline this is there are lots of instances where you have a person in an organization and they aren't a good fit for customer service, let's say, but they would be a good fit in the accounting department, or they're super creative and they can't follow procedures, but they'd be good in marketing, or the warehouse. Hiring people is an expensive proposition. Firing people is an expensive proposition. It's important that you as the leader use the human capital that you have in your department for the good of the organization. And so if you can't find a place for a person within your department, look where their talents might work elsewhere. This doesn't mean that you are shoveling poor performers onto other departments. I've been in situations like that before where people just shoveled poor performers into my department. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a careful involvement, and this is why you put the time and effort to understand the person and where they can be successful in the organization. All right, so definitely avail yourself of those opportunities. So the question is when do you step up and when do you fire somebody? The answer is this, and it's not a surprising answer, but we're going to call it out here. When a leader has done everything possible to get an individual up to speed without seeing results, the time has come to let that individual go. This is you coaching them personally. This is you getting them with a team member who's exceptional so that they can pick their brain. This is you creating a list of best practices that they can follow, tips and tricks from all of the people on your team that they can follow. When you've availed yourself of all of those opportunities and you're still not seeing that performance, then it's time to move on. The other thing that this creates is it creates a paper trail. You know, whether it's progressive discipline, whether it is a performance improvement plan, all of this follows along with that. And it's part of the job. And most of the time when you do this with poor performers, you're going to see their performance increase and get to where it needs to be. And some of those people will continue to improve and become superstars in your department. But there will be that subset of time, 10, 20% of the time, where they cannot meet those expectations. And that's where you look to let them go. Or as we just mentioned, look for another place within the organization where their skills and their strengths are going to work for them and make them successful. Not just another try at another department where they might work out. You need to be confident in that, and that confidence comes from working with them more and more and more. When you're having those hard discussions, it's important that you tell them exactly where they are failing, and what they need to do to improve. And the importance of exactly when you're having a performance improvement discussion with somebody, it isn't just that, you know what, your demeanor on the phone isn't what we need it to be. It doesn't create a friendly tone with people. All right, you might think that's specific. That doesn't cut it. What you need is when you say this, it can come across wrong. When you say this, it can come across wrong. I need you to use this lingo and these phrases a little bit more. That establishes rapport. So get specific on the exact things that you want to see happen. And those are the things that build. The idea is that you just create something that works and then you can build on it. Or something that doesn't work and you can figure out another thing to do. But you want to get specific. If you get general with things, you're not going to get the results that you want. So you're talking about kind of the progressive discipline. Now, many organizations, especially large ones, have firm progressive discipline steps. But for those organizations that don't, and I know there's plenty out there that don't, this is kind of the progression that you would go through. You started with a friendly conversation. You didn't get the results. You asked how you could help them change. You didn't get the results. You told them directly what they needed to change. Didn't get the results. All right? It's clear you've made an effort not to put too much pressure on him or her to be too negative. The next step in the escalation is to tell him or her he is going to be written up. You have to move further up the escalation of counseling. You will need to write him up. Make it serious in those cases. Now, I also love that they went into the discussion of why sometimes leaders won't fire individuals. All right, and a lot of these resonated. One of the things that makes it so hard to fire someone is the leader's knowledge that they could have done, or that they have not done everything to actually lead the poor performer. One of the reasons that you might not fire them is you have a guilty conscience because you haven't spent the time, you haven't spent the effort. And that's why it's important to do that, to really invest and mentor that particular poor performer so that you can be confident in saying, you know what, I tried everything. Or gosh darn, I tried nearly everything I could to get that poor performer to improve. The other issue that comes up and why people don't fire individuals is they're concerned with, well, I don't want to have to replace them. All right? who said, the comment is going through kind of a scenario here, telling, again, one of these great application stories that he has in this book, is who said you would have to bring someone in? I asked, why not just bring someone up? So this is the replacement of a project manager in this particular story. But, you know, it's not just that you have to go outside and bring in another project manager. Is there a superstar on their team or on somebody else's team who can step into that role? So the concern about replacing an individual and the time that I understand that even if you do have to replace an individual from outside, there is a timing. It's going to take 4, 5, 6 weeks to replace that individual, maybe even more, depending on the training time to come up to speed on things. That's something that's painful, but for the good of the team, you have to do that. You must do that. The other thing, the third thing that gets caught up on this, so the first one that prevents some people from firing people is a guilty conscience. I didn't invest enough time. Second thing is a concern that, you know what, it's going to be so difficult to replace this individual. The third thing is that the individual can get it done, but the issue is that they're not getting it done. Even if an individual, and I've seen this before where I've got brilliant employees who can do all kinds of things, but they simply don't. And when push comes to shove, when you've gone through the escalations on things and they still can't get it done, even though they have all the ability in the world to get it done, then you have to let them go. Not fun, and it's sad, but it will happen to you in your leadership career where you do have to let somebody go who is more than capable of doing the job, but for whatever reason, the work doesn't resonate with them, they don't have the motivation, whatever it happens to be. Sad but true. Susie, so good to see you here. Jana, you as well. Fifth, getting into the fifth dichotomy that he talks about. You need to train hard, but train smart. All right, it's not just about the volume, it's about the quality as well. So one of these kind of, I want to say obvious principles or dichotomies, and I don't think I highlighted too terribly much in here, even though I'm a big fan, obviously, of training. One of the principles that's in here is there is no growth in the comfort zone. I'm going to say that one more time. There is no growth in the comfort zone. So when we talk about training individuals, you need to be pressing against their threshold of comfort. You need to be exceeding that. That's where the growth comes in. When you're working out in the gym, the growth comes with the last couple of reps. You may do 10 or 12 reps on bench press, for instance, but it is the 10th, 11th, and 12th rep that really matter. And it's really those last ones where you get to failing point that really matter. You need to push people out of their comfort zone because that's where they're going to grow the most. If training is too easy, and then this gets into kind of the dichotomy of it as well. If training is too easy and doesn't stretch the capabilities of the participants, their improvement will be minimal. But if training overwhelms the team to a point where its participants can no longer function, it greatly diminishes the lessons they will learn. If you go too fast in your training and people are falling by the wayside trying to process an order or whatever else, then they get overwhelmed and they're not learning anything in the process. They're struggling all the way through. You need to be smart in how you push people. Move fast, but move at a pace where they can lock in that learning as they go. You give them those opportunities. If you race through the whole thing, nobody picks up anything. They get zero. So it's worse than undertraining them where they get minimal improvement. If you overtrain them and hit them with too much stuff, that cup runs over and they actually get no improvement whatsoever. Whoa. Moving through my highlights here. The other thing that I learned, and I'll quote what he says here, but then I'll apply it the way that I kind of took it, and that is, the other thing I learned was that at some point I had to be willing to cancel a mission. So in this case, the mission was a training mission. And when you're not getting the results, when you're training individuals, you need to be flexible. You need to be flexible with the curriculum. You need to be flexible with the individual. It's not that you necessarily cancel a mission like I kind of underlined here. It's that you are flexible in adjusting the mission or the training to get out of it what you need to, or at least get some sort of progress. It may be that it's a different sort of progress or understanding or development than you were initially setting out to, but be flexible so that none of your efforts are wasted. Right? There may be times where you have to cancel or stop doing a particular exercise because it's not getting the results that you want. Be open to that in your training. If you're flexible with it, you're going to be able to get more results with it, all right? So realize that that takes effort. You know, it's easy enough to create a training manual and just kind of spin through it mindlessly, but you need to be engaged and taking a look at who you're training to make sure they're getting something out of it. And when they're not, either stop doing that exercise or make an adjustment so that they can get something out of it. The best leaders, and this kind of goes into ongoing, the best leaders didn't shy away from tough conversations to correct underperformance. So you need to have these conversations. That's part of the training smart, training hard, is being willing to have the difficult conversation. This doesn't usually happen in the training room. This usually happens in the live environment, where you have a great employee who is doing 9 out of 10 things right, but there's no reason they can't do the 10th thing right. But you need to have that discussion with them. And that's, you know, the more discussions you have, the more they understand where you're coming from. They're not threatened by those discussions, and they actually start getting something out of it. Leaders who pushed their people to excel, to continuously learn and grow, enabled their teams to become comfortable in situations where they were previously uncomfortable. The main point here is it's continuous, and that's part of having these hard conversations. Training doesn't end in the training room. Training doesn't end with the first 2 weeks on the job. Training is continual, and when you build that into your leadership style and build that into your team, you'll see your team continue to grow and develop, and with that growth and development comes better and better performance on an individual basis, but then as a department-wide basis. And that's why those great leaders are the ones who instill that sense of continuous learning in their organizations, and that gets huge results for them. The best training programs are not orchestrated from the top, but driven from the bottom. The best training programs aren't driven from the top, they're driven from the bottom. Utilize the most accomplished members of the team to drive training programs and pass on lessons learned to others. One of the best things that you can do with a training program is follow up with people who have gone through it and ask them what resonated with you, what didn't, what should I have included? All right, that's where you get those best practices from your best employees. Make sure that you are kind of checking yourself. You can create a great training program, but it can always be improved, and that improvement usually comes from those discussions with people who have gone through it, and those at the line level, and say, what do we need? What was missed? What was hit on too long that doesn't need to be hit on that hard? That sort of thing. So involve the team in your training. That's one of the big things that'll help. You need to place them in tough circumstances in training that will prepare them for the challenges of the real world. And training, of course, is a passion of mine. And one of the most important things is that when you're doing, say, the example I come up with is role-playing scenarios. Oftentimes, we make those almost a joke, where the person playing the customer, for instance, is just ridiculous and you know, over the top. You want it to be a realistic and tough scenario. It may be that you survey the team for the most difficult situation that they found themselves in with a customer. Hit people with those scenarios, those real world scenarios that are extremely difficult but are handled in a neutral way, because that's how those things often come up. They don't often come up in crisis. It's all of a sudden just a regular call or regular interaction with a customer that all of a sudden starts going sideways because of certain eventualities. Teaching your team how to deal with those tough things. Don't gloss over them. Don't make them a joke. Make them serious. Make people follow along with their roles in a calm and collected manner that mimics what their actual employee would, or actual customer might go through. Don't be afraid to toughen up with some role play scenarios, but make them realistic as well. Moving into the 6th dichotomy that we talk about in this book, and this is being aggressive but not reckless. So one of the principles, and this is why reading the book Extreme Ownership is good, because there's some background principles that come to play and kind of call out some of these dichotomies. One of those principles was default aggressive. It's most important to default to an aggressive mindset. Is there a problem? Don't wait, handle it now. Be aggressive. So that's great, but you can obviously take that one too far and become reckless in things. Principles of this one are that the problems aren't going to solve themselves. A leader must get aggressive and take action to solve them. And we see that all the time, especially when we talk employee development or problem employees. Well, they'll eventually self-correct. They'll eventually get better. No, you need to step in and do something and control that. But being too passive and waiting for a solution to appear often enables a problem to escalate and get out of control, and that's what happens all the time. It's not that a situation gets better with time. Most of the time, a situation gets worse with time. The best leaders and the best teams don't wait to act. Aggressive means being proactive wherever possible. But at the same time, and I'm looking for the call out here on this, at the same time, you want to measure that. So you want to be aggressive, but you need to be using your critical thinking skills. You need to be engaging and getting data. That's the big thing. You can be aggressive, but get data. Get a second opinion on things. Take a moment to get some feedback on the situation that you're dealing with, and that will help you from being too reckless in the things that you're doing. One of the ways that this comes up, and it goes through again a scenario where it's a fast-moving company, the CEO's all gangbusters and going in 3 different directions on new product lines, everything else. They high-five at the end of the meeting, and then Jocko's in the airport afterwards, and he's like, that was a little too much on one side, and draws the I liked the comment in here. It was a good emotion. We were happy. We were being aggressive, but it might be that it was too much of a good thing. We were too stuck on ourselves. We had too much ego that everything was going to go right with things, and that caused us to be perhaps a little reckless, and indeed they did scale back some of their expansion plans to minimize the risk if something were to go wrong in a particular situation. Moving into the 7th dichotomy that we talk about in this book, and that is being disciplined but not rigid. The more discipline that a team exercises, the more freedom that team will have to maneuver by implementing small adjustments to the existing plan. This is one of the reasons that I'm not a fan of having a big call center background. I was never a fan of scripts. I wanted objectives. I wanted, to establish rapport. You could create kind of a checklist that way. You don't script the interaction. And that way people knew what they needed to hit. They needed to establish rapport with a great greeting and asking some questions about what the person really wanted and then closing it well. But they had flexibility to move. This is where you're disciplined in your procedures. But what that discipline gets you is that gets you the ability to know when to deviate from those procedures to get the benefit that you're really looking for. Disciplined procedures must be balanced with the ability to apply common sense to an issue. I love that. Disciplined procedures must be balanced with the ability to apply common sense to an issue. And I don't hit that. I don't want to hit that too hard because we usually see that, and that's where it comes in. It's common sense, where we're being too dogmatic in our procedures, in our application of principles in the office, that sort of thing. We need to have that flexibility to be able to deviate from those for the betterment of the mission, for the betterment of the goals that we're looking for. So there'd be the issue that comes up, I'll keep using the term of scripting with a call, because that's a procedure that's in place commonly. Oftentimes you need to be able to deviate from that script to be able to satisfy the person the way that they want to be satisfied. They don't want to go through all of the hoops. They just have a quick question. Okay, then I will go ahead and deviate from that. And there's coaching that can be given, and that's why you hit certain principles within, say, a call or a customer interaction. But it may be that you skip a whole bunch of procedures because the person just wants to get in and get out. They don't want the whole spiel. And we often have felt that from a customer point of view, not necessarily from an employee point of view, where we've gone in and people have taken us through all of the different rules and regulations on something when we really just wanted something quick. Moving on to the next dichotomy that he has, holding people accountable but not holding their hands. So you need to hold people accountable, but you need to empower them to hold themselves accountable, quite frankly. This didn't happen talking through a scenario. This didn't happen because I held them accountable. He's talking about a situation that he had in the military. It happened because they now understood why. Getting back to this why that we talk about oftentimes. why the particular piece of gear was important to them for the mission and for the team. Now they were holding themselves accountable. They were empowered because they understood the why. That's the most important thing in accountability, is letting people know why something is important, why something needs to be done the way that it needs to be done. You get all kinds of things from that, empowerment, other things, but you also get accountability because now they understand the situation better and they will hold themselves accountable. While a leader wants team members to police themselves because they understand why, the leader still has to hold people accountable through some level of inspection to ensure that the why is not only understood, but is being acted upon. The whole goal of this is that you are trusting them that they will do the right thing without direct oversight, but you do need to inspect on a regular basis that it's being done the way that it's supposed to be done. Otherwise, people eventually, I want to say you take almost that one step. And so you take one step where you aren't as accountable with something, and then you take another, and all of a sudden you're 7, 8, 9, 10 steps away from where you wanted to be originally, but it happened in degrees. All right. He quotes somebody, and I can't see where the quote comes from, but I'll just call it out right here, and that is, when it comes to standards as a leader, it is not what you preach, it's what you tolerate. All right? It's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate. It's not what you tell everybody to do, it's what you allow them to do after you've told them what to do. All right? Instead, what you want to do is balance accountability with educating the team and empowering its members to maintain standards even without direct oversight from the top. This gets to the crux of it, and I want to hit that again. Balance accountability with educating the team. So you want to hold them accountable, but the best way to do that is to educate them in the why and in a whole bunch of other things so they get better perspective on things. And then they will hold themselves more accountable. But once you need to continue. Oh, yes, sorry. So talking through a scenario, and I guess I won't quote it here. One of the things is, especially with complex things, it isn't just the accountability that you get right away, and it isn't just that you empower them right away, especially with complex things, especially with big projects. It's important that you get feedback as the project is rolling out so that you can make adjustments. One of the big things that can hit with accountability is you started off absolutely fantastic, but this thing happened, that thing happened, and all of a sudden people don't know what to do. And they're not going to be able to hold themselves accountable because they're trying to find out what they need to do in a particular situation. So what you want to do is you want to be engaging with the team through long rollouts, through long projects, through tasks that take a long time, and get feedback so that you can make adjustments as needed together. This is bringing them into that discussion, having that discussion of why. Moving into, quickly just kind of rolling through these, moving into the next dichotomy of leadership is you want to be a leader and a follower. And so if you stuck with me through this, I think it was Mansour, this is where we get to that whole leader-follower thing. All right. One of the keys he was talking about, and he worked with Chris Kyle, who is famous for the movie The American Sniper. Chris had key experiences and knowledge that I didn't. And this is why it's important to engage with your team. If you have problems, ask your team about them. Your team has solutions that you haven't even thought of yet. And this hits it, and why it's important to be a follower as well as a leader. So in this case, Chris is his subordinate. But Chris had key experience and knowledge that he didn't. You have to engage with that experience so that you can make a better decision, a more informed decision. Leading didn't mean pushing my agenda or proving that I had all the answers, because you don't as a leader. It was about collaborating with the rest of the team and determining how we could most effectively accomplish our mission. Such a key. As a leader, you don't have all of the answers. But you know what? As a team, you likely have almost all of the answers, I would say. But your role as a leader isn't always to just know exactly what to do. It's to collaborate with the team to get information, to get ideas, and from that comes what you'll need to make a proper decision to help accomplish everybody's goals. So in an effort to prove my leadership, I failed to follow. And rather than strengthen me as a leader in my eyes of the team, it undermined my leadership. In those instances, I had to work to recover and build back trust with the team. So what he's talking about is when he did push his agenda, when he did ignore what everybody else was saying to prove that he was right. That didn't strengthen him as a leader. It weakened him as a leader. It showed that he was irrational. It showed that they didn't matter as much to him as his ego did. And it proved that he is willing to make the poor decision for a poor reason. So you may think that shoving your ideas down people's throat is going to be something that strengthens you as a leader, and it does not. It's an emotional reaction to a logical situation. So be willing to take that feedback. And it's in a lot of situations you will get feedback and you will get ideas that don't work, that don't make sense. But that opens up a discussion where you can then talk about that, and everybody comes to a better understanding of the situation, and that way everybody can move forward with accountability and with confidence. And that's what gets those results that you're looking for. A leader must be willing to lean on the expertise and ideas of others for the good of the team. I'm going to say that again because this is the key. You want to be a leader and a follower. That's the dichotomy that we're talking about. A leader must be willing to lean on the expertise and ideas of others for the good of the team. Every single individual on your team has a different perspective and has information. If they have particular customer accounts that they deal with, they know those customer accounts better than you because they deal with those people on a more regular basis. You need to get that knowledge. They know what's working and not working with the system. They know what they're missing as far as inventory is concerned. They're aware of these things, more so than you are, and you need to get that information from them. Engage your employees. That's how you become a follower in the right way, is collaborating with those things. Now, taking this to another level, all right? So being a leader and a follower, the classic example of that is you need to be a leader to your team and you need to be a follower of your boss. One of the most important jobs of any leader is to support your own boss. So it's not just supporting their decisions, but hey, what can I do to help you out? Are you covering for their weaknesses? If they're bad at PowerPoint or bad at Excel, are you offering to help them put together reports or put together presentations? Are you magnifying their strengths? Are you setting people up for, how good they are at a particular thing? Are you doing that as a follower of your own boss? A subordinate leader must still be willing to follow and support the chain of command. Failing to do this undermines the authority of the entire chain of command. And we see this come up when your boss makes a decision that you disagree with, but you have to roll it out to your team. So now you're the face of the decision. Now what happens all the time is that the boss makes that decision. You come down and you undermine it. You know what? He wants us to do this. I don't agree with it, but we have to do it this particular way. What you've done in that particular situation is you have undermined your own authority. You have taught your team that it is okay to poo-poo your decisions just like you've done to your boss. In those situations where you don't understand why a course of action needs to take place, you need to have more discourse with your boss as to why that takes place. You need to have, and if you have that discourse, you need to have better discourse. Ask the right questions in the right way that are going to get you the confidence with which to be confident with your team. Because if you don't, what you've done is erode your own authority within the organization. A leader who lacks, and I liked this particular aspect of things, talking about dealing with particular individuals. Again, he's going through a business scenario that he dealt with in consulting. A leader who lacks confidence would be hypersensitive to any perceived slight or lack of professionalism in my communication with him. So this is managing your interactions with your boss. A lot of people, I got a question just now about a boss who's disappointing. In a lot of those cases, those bosses aren't confident in their own leadership, and what that does is it makes them sensitive to you usurping their authority, to you showing off your skill sets. They're worried that you're going to take their job, that sort of thing. When you have a boss who lacks that confidence, you need to make sure that you are addressing things and giving your ideas in ways that don't kind of aggravate that sensitivity. This isn't easy. I'm not saying it's easy to manage a personal relationship with your boss in that way, but it is something that you can get practice with and get skilled at so that you aren't in a position where they are defensive and hypersensitive every time you communicate with them. So especially when you're dealing with bosses who aren't confident, there's more minefields to kind of dance around just a little bit. Next dichotomy is planning, but not over planning. And we see both of these things. We see people take reckless actions without a firm plan, and that causes a bunch of problems. And then we see people who never do anything because they're constantly in the planning stage of things. Don't try to plan for every contingency. Doing so will overburden you and weigh you down. And I'm going to move quickly from there. Yeah, so choose at most 3 or 4 of the most probable contingencies for each phase, along with the worst case scenario. All right, over planning creates additional and sometimes far more difficult problems. So you want to have that plan, but if you over plan, what happens is A, you might not ever get anything off the ground because you're constantly looking for that next eventuality. So to bring a little bit of focus, and this is perfect advice here, for each phase of a project, come up with 3 or 4 contingencies. What could go wrong? What are the 3 or 4 most likely things to go wrong? And what are you going to do in that case? The other thing is, what is the worst case scenario? I talk about, as I have a lot of experience rolling out brand new systems. And it's that go live day that's always just totally concerning because you don't know in a live environment whether the system is really going to function the way that you want it to. And what I always got very much in touch with was, what was the worst case scenario? Worst case scenario is the new system doesn't work. Worst system is it breaks all the computers. So what are you going to do? Well, we're going to go manual. So do you have order forms printed up for people? Do you have reports printed out the night before of everybody who in the hospitality world was staying in the hotel? Are you prepared in the worst case scenario where the system completely fails and you have to go back to the old system? When you have the worst case scenario covered, it gives you an extraordinary amount of confidence moving forward with the new way of doing things, all right, or with whatever project you're rolling out. So cover the worst case scenario. Oftentimes it doesn't take more than a few steps of, just a little bit of thought. Okay, how do I flip the switch back to the way it was before? But when you know what you're going to do in that worst case scenario, it takes a whole bunch of pressure off of you in those high pressure environments. But getting back specifically to planning, the way to plan but not over plan is just to look at the most likely contingencies. 3 or 4 things is all you really need to cover. You can figure out the other ones. All right, maybe not as quickly as you would have liked to if you had planned for it, but doing more than that is that cost benefit that just doesn't work out for you. But on the flip side, when a leader dismisses likely threats or problems that could arise, it sets the team up for greater difficulties and may lead to mission failure. If you don't plan for any of those contingencies, then all of a sudden when you stack one on top of another that occur over the lifetime of a larger project, all of a sudden you may fail completely in that. So you need to spend some of the time. This is a classic 80-20 principle, where you spend 20% of the effort to get 80% of the benefit. All right, so you deal with 20% of the most likely, situations that are going to go wrong, and you get 80% of the benefit, or maybe 90% of the benefit out of it, as opposed to looking at 10, 20 different contingencies that could take place, but some of them are 1%, 2%, 3% chance of actually taking place. So good principle as far as planning. I like that. Look for the most likely 3 or 4 contingencies in any particular area or phase that you're rolling out. Moving into, and I wanted to say, second to last dichotomy that he talks about in this book, and that is to be humble but not passive. And this was a really enlightening one for me, a really good chapter to get into. But while a leader can't be passive, a leader must also carefully prioritize when and where to push back. So you want to be humble in taking directive, in taking perhaps even poor directive from your leaders. But you have to also be aware that there are times you need to pick your battles when you want to push back and say, I think there might be a better way of doing this. If you handle the other situations correctly, then those few times when you push back are going to see much more traction than you might get if you're always pushing back and making sure that everything is exactly the way that you want a particular situation to be. We were successful in the 2 examples above, only going through a couple of military scenarios that they talk about. We were successful in the 2 examples above only because we had built a strong relationship with our commanding officer and his staff at the task group through humility. They had dealt with their boss and the leading organization well in the past. They had provided information. They had been good servants. They had been good followers. And that is what allowed them the capital, leadership capital, to be able to push back in certain situations that were really important. Staying humble was the key to developing trust with the chain of command. Staying humble was the key to developing trust with the chain of command. Nobody. I could be a very confident leader, but if I have somebody who is cocky and made it known that they, are looking to push me out for my job, that's not a situation that's going to breed much trust. Humility is the key to that, and they hit on this a couple of other times. It was the smallest, seemingly insignificant things that truly solidified our relationship. And that goes for any relationship that's out there. So much of that is trust, but that trust is built up with the little things. When you get the little things right, it shows that you care on a larger level. So what happens is that you don't really care about your team. But you know what? Every Friday you bring in donuts. But otherwise, you're not really, doing any of the little things like making sure they have enough Post-it notes, bringing something back from the supply closet, let's say, for them when you make a run to it. It's the little things that matter. And I hate that phrase, all right? Big things absolutely matter. But the little things are often the things that demonstrate that you care about the big things. And so don't look over those. Humility, and they call it out pretty strongly here when they're kind of summarizing this chapter on being humble but not passive. Humility is the most important quality in a leader. Strong statement. When we had to fire SEAL leaders from leadership positions in a platoon or task unit, they had to fire people. It was almost never because they were tactically unsound, physically unfit, or incompetent. They didn't fire people because they were incompetent. More often than not, they fired people because it was most often because they were not humble. They couldn't check their ego. They refused to accept constructive criticism or take ownership of their mistakes. And I think we've seen that. You see that a lot in organizations where people aren't fired because they're not capable. They're fired because their ego gets in the way of them being capable, and it creates a whole bunch of friction and a whole bunch of problems. Humility is essential to building strong relationships with others, but being too humble can be equally disastrous for a team. A leader cannot be passive. When the leader's passive, what happens is people can just walk all over them. They're not leading at that point. They're more of a doormat. And so you want to be humble. All right, you know your place, stay in your lane, shall we say. But there are times when you want to push back. And you pick those battles. This is that art form. It's not easy. None of these principles are easy, and it's very situation driven. But there will be times when you want to push back. But if you find yourself pushing back a lot of the time, then you may need to check yourself just a little bit. One of the things with that is it's not that it is your boss's fault in that case. In a lot of cases, we can feed our bosses more information or feed them the right information which will produce the right decision coming back down, which will help us follow along with that. So in many cases where you're getting a directive from your boss that you don't agree with, look at the information that you fed them the week before, the day before, the month before that led to that decision, and see if there aren't improvements that you can make in the information that you're giving your boss that will lead to better decisions that will help you be humble and follow along, all right? But with that humbleness, don't be too passive with it as well. Now getting into the last dichotomy here, you want to be focused but detached. So the principle, and they use a battlefield example on this, is you're focused because you're looking oftentimes right down the gun sight, all right? That focus you on the situation. However, he goes through a situation where something happened, and instead of staying focused, what he did was he stepped back away, put his gun in the air, and looked around. So he detached himself from what he was working on at that particular moment. And that gave him the perspective to see what was really going on in that situation. Being too focused, and I talk in time management a ton about focus, but you need that detachment to get your priorities in order. All right, and we'll hit a couple of points on this as well. An organization does well only those things the boss checks. This was the quote I was looking for earlier from Colonel David Hackworth in the book About Face. An organization does well only those things the boss checks. So this is being resolute but not overbearing. All right, this is the accountability, but not holding people's hands. All right, so you can give a directive, but you want to check. All right, trust but verify is the common example on this. So you want to go through and check whether people are following, principles on an order here, an order there. If you've got, 100 orders a day that people are processing, are they following along perfectly? Well, you don't look at all of them. You just pick one up every once in a while. Organizations do well only on those things that the boss checks. All right, so you might check one order from each of your 10 people every day. It might take all of 10 minutes. But now all of a sudden, all of those people know that you're checking, and they're going to make sure to fall in line with that just a little bit. I kind of hitting this point again, I couldn't obsess over the details, but I should nevertheless be attentive to them. So if it's not a matter of checking, is there a report that you can pull that helps you be attentive to them? Can you report that out to the team so that they know you're looking at that? All right. Yes, you want to empower them. This kind of brings everything together. Yes, you want to empower them. Yes, you want them to hold themselves accountable. But you also need to check on them every once in a while to make sure that, as I talked about, that little single step where they do one thing just a little bit off, and then next week they do a little more, and all of a sudden 10 weeks down the road they're doing something completely different. You want to be checking. That's your role as a leader, is to check on those things. And that's one way of being focused on a particular thing, but being detached just in general from it. Removed from the details, and this will get into my vacation speech here, removed from the details, pressures, and pressing deadlines of the front lines or your work. Removed from the details and the pressures of it, they found it easier to see the strategic priorities with clarity and how best to achieve them. It is important to take breaks in the middle of your day. It's important to take your lunch break right in the middle of the day. That's the perfect time. You get a chance to detach. That gives your mind and your body a chance to recover, but it also gives you a chance to reset priorities. When I go on vacation, I always come back from vacation with some great large priorities or strategy decisions in place. This worked for me throughout my career and after my career. Vacations are one of my best tools for making great strategic decisions, because you separate yourself from the day in, day out, from your mind focusing on all of that, and your mind then looks for a focus somewhere else, and you're able to look at different things and more strategic things. So that is it for the Dichotomy of Leadership, 12 dichotomies that he goes through. A fantastic book. You can read it. You don't have to read Extreme Ownership first. I would recommend reading Extreme Ownership first. I like that book a little bit better. This is fantastic, though. Definitely worthy of being on your list. If you have any questions about the book or anything else on there, by all means, drop down into the comment section. Let me know. I'll answer it to the best of my abilities. Otherwise, next week, we're going to get Decisive with Chip and Dan Heath. And then after that, we are going to Dare to Lead with Brené Brown 2 weeks from now. So thanks for tuning into this, and I will talk to you all later. Thanks. Bye-bye.